Hi everybody. So I said I'd do a Prop 4 video about 2 or 3 days ago. I did not do a Prop 3 video a couple days ago, so I'm doing it now. Sorry, Prop 4. And I honestly, in retrospect, I really should have done the Prop 4 video when I did the Prop 3 video, because in many ways the objections to each are kind of the same, right? But let's recap over what Prop 4 does. So Prop 4, much like Prop 3, is a grant program that, excuse me, sorry, I'm coming out of a bit of a cold. So it's a grant program that will be dispersed kind of in a formulaic fashion between 72% of which will go to 8 nonprofit hospitals, 18% of which will go to 5 other nonprofit hospitals within the UC system, and then 10% that will go to any other public or private, I believe, nonprofit hospitals that have a children's ward. How those grants will work is a little bit different than the legislative analyst's office says, right? So you have to understand something about these propositions. They're looked on by attorneys, by what else? Oh, by accountants, by the state's budgetary men, but they're not necessarily. These guys aren't necessarily right. Excuse me. Sometimes they're wrong. Here's one area in where they're wrong. If you look at the LAO, the ballot summary, right? That's really what I'm talking about here. The ballot summary talks about how these bonds will go to capital improvements for all hospitals. And that's not necessarily the case. As a matter of fact, if you look at the specific allocations as the proposition defines it, the only entities that can use grant money for capital improvement are that 10% of entities that aren't otherwise described in the code sections. So it's only 10% of the grant fund, the hospitals receiving grant funds can go and use this stuff to improve their pediatric ward section by rebuilding it or things of that nature, right? And I think there's an objection to that, right, other than the bond argument, which I've made before and I'll make again for posterity's sake. But, I mean, the objection to that would be, you know, if you're talking about children's care, what you really should talk about is children's care, right? You should talk about how best to find the medicine and the research that will get children healthy again. And so most of the other grants, like the other 90%, go to these hospitals and they're dispersed appropriately. So when I say 72, 18, and 10, right, I'm talking 72% of a $1.5 billion grant system. And this is going to be paid over 35 years at $80 million a year, right? So, you know, I was talking about that $179 billion of general obligation bond debt that we're paying back. This adds $80 million to that. And on top of, I think, we'll just say another $100 million that was from Prop 1, I believe, and another $100 million that was from Prop 3, right? So, you know, this is $250 million just in this, with these 3 propositions alone, right? So the good in this bill is very simple. The grants, 90% of these grants go to hospitals. Specifically, they have to go to ways to improve patient outcomes, right? To improve patient care, right? Not necessarily for capital improvement. Obviously, it's a laudable goal, right? Of course, we want nonprofit hospitals. And quick aside here, when I talk about nonprofit hospitals, hospitals are nonprofits. The NFL is a nonprofit. The people who work at these hospitals can definitely make a profit. It's how they get paid, right? So a lot of these people who work for these nonprofits aren't necessarily poor, right? Some of them are actually very wealthy because they're individuals working for the nonprofits. The nonprofit itself that doesn't have, like, profit to tax. But that's a different story for a different time. Basically, most of this grant money will go towards the areas that it will go towards. And how do I know that? Well, the grant has conditions. All grants have conditions, at least if they're done right. And the conditions are that they have to go to a program that will improve patient outcome. The problem with grants is that when you do something like a grant, you're kind of deferring to administrative authorities within the California state governing system to adequately determine whether or not something is actually being done correctly. That's very hard to determine, right? And it's very hard to determine at the beginning because like economics, you can make all sorts of predictions that don't come true. I think, for example, we were supposed to have 2% inflation like a year ago. No dice, right? So, not that the economy isn't doing well, it is, but it just hasn't reached that 2% mark. And so now you have economists debating over whether the 2% mark is important or not. Well, that's the same deal with grants, right? You can give money to a program that may work, but it may also not work. Right, so do I believe that this has good intentions? It's sort of legislatively defined to have good intentions, right? Can we guarantee good outcomes with this? No. As some of my debate friends would say, there's what you'd call at least a 1% solvency that these outcomes will exist. In other words, if you give money to grants, there is a chance that they will work. I don't deny that. And if you don't give money at these grants, there's 0% chance it will work because you're not doing anything. And 1 is greater than 0, right? So you'd want to do the one that's greater than the other. That's kind of the debate solvency argument in favor of Prop 4. The arguments I've seen against it, the one on the ballot statement is bad. Well, it is bad, it's also not bad, right? So it talks about bond indebtedness, right? That's the main reason. That's probably why I would vote no on this, just because I worry about the cascade effect, right? No one of these single measures is going to kill us. It's all of these together that are going to have to be paid back with future high tax revenue, right? And they're going to have to get the taxes from somewhere, and I guarantee you that the rich aren't going to be able to afford it all, right? Because California already heavily taxes on income. Income tax is a heavy part of our tax system. So this is just, if you pass a bond measure, this is going to later on increase pressures to increase property taxes, right? It's not going to have a direct effect, right? Because we're talking about the acts of men here, right? But it is going to increase the pressure on people to essentially repeal Prop 13, right? And so if you're a big fan of Proposition 13, or otherwise somebody wanting to buy a home that doesn't want high property taxes, well, you might want to be leery of that. That being said, obviously the goals are noble here. My position is that they should be legislatively funded, but that's where we're at. But the argument that the opponents use is essentially that this is effectively a tax here and now, right? And when you make that argument that this is a tax here and now, the easy rebuttal is it's not, because it's not, right? The conservative arguments against bond measures are arguments that take time to take root, right? So the easy refutation is always there. The refutation of these bond measures won't directly increase our pain is accurate, right? Like, there's no response to that. Essentially, the conservative arguments amount to speculation. Now, it's increasingly valid speculation, but it's still speculation. So when you're talking about a future potential tax increase versus improving children's lives, the emotive argument for improving children's lives is going to take effect. And frankly, I think there's a lot of credence to that, right? Like, what's the point of money if not to spend it on things that we want to spend it on, right? That we should spend it on. Money is a tool of justice, right? I accept that aspect of the left-wing argument. And I am a conservative, right? So I expect that, right? I accept that money is a what we do with our understanding of money affects what we believe, right? And displays what we believe, right? So what we spend our money on is, in fact, a reflection of our values. What I disagree with the left on is whether the lack of spending on that or whether the necessity of spending on it is the only way to achieve the outcomes that our values require, right? That's where I would split the difference. The thing about grants is there are always going to be government giveaways to some private entity that purports to do well, right? And I think in the future what I should do is do some research onto the effectiveness of grants, see if there's ever been any research on that. If anybody has some, I'd love to look at it. Because while I think the goals, I keep saying this, the goals are laudable, right? But I think we all want better outcomes. Nobody who's watching my video, the dozens and dozens of you, if I get dozens, by the way, I'd be ecstatic. But the people who are watching this video, I think we all want to cure cancer. I think we all want to have children live full lives, right? I mean, I had a great life as a child, great upbringing, right? I would not want to wish anything but that on anyone else. So, yeah, I mean, I think the goal is it's a good idea, but it's very hard to say whether or not it will work because we don't know where this money is going to go. I mean, we know what it's going to be used for, but we don't know how it's going to be used to achieve that purpose, right? So that's speculative. It's equally as speculative that this will lead to tax pressures in the future. But the more and more you keep spending on bonds, the more and more tax pressures you're going to have, right? And so we have to make sure that we have a definitive plan. I'd like to see something in the future where some scientists, a group of experts, has come together and said, we need money for this specific thing, right? And if that specific thing could show results, I might be more willing to support that. But a lot of these are just kind of speculative, out of the blue ideas. And until we get a better handle of what's going to be done, I think we have to be cautious with this. That being said, your mileage may vary on that argument, right? I intend this video to be as neutral as I possibly can and to be as honest as I possibly can. Neutrally speaking, if you think you trust the grant process, vote yes. If you don't mind paying higher taxes, obviously vote yes. If you don't think this will lead to higher taxes, vote yes, right? But if you're worried about that and you don't think this will achieve results, vote no. And that's where I stand on it. I think this is the last of the bond ones, right? Because I'm sick and tired of talking about bond indebtedness, and I'm sure the people listening to this are sick and tired of hearing it. The next one does talk about taxes, but it's kind of the reverse argument. So we'll get to that in a minute. My plan is to record a second one tonight. But anyway, thank you for watching, and have a nice one.